Morning, it's Matt here again with Semper Fly, and I'm down here at the airport again this morning doing a few touch and goes in the pattern, and there was a few other Aeronca champs in the pattern also flying around, and I thought I'd do a quick video on the comparison between these two very popular post-World War II tube and fabric airplanes. There were a bunch of different models of both airplanes made. The Piper Cub that we're talking about, it's the J3, was basically built between 1938 and 1947. They built about 20,000 of them. They ranged from very early engine horsepowers, around 38, 45 horsepower, up to about 65 became the standard for most of the production. And then some of the later years, and the ones you see now, have been modified with 75, 85, 90, and even 0200 larger horsepower engines. They were built mostly with Lycomings, Continentals, and Franklins, with most of them being built with Continentals. In 1948, the Piper Cub line began to morph into different versions. They also changed the numbering system from J to PA, so they had various PA-11, PA-12s, PA-18, which became the Super Cub that you see all over Alaska, and on up into PA-20 and 22 Pacer and Tri-Pacer series. And then in the 60s, they went into the Cherokees. Aeroncas were started a little bit later. The basic Aeronca Champ began production around 1944, and then 1945, 1946 was the big boom year, similar with Cubs, and most of the ones you see nowadays are probably going to be 1946s. They made them up until 1951, and then the company ceased production of the Champ. In later years, into the 60s, 70s, 90s, and even today, various other companies have purchased the rights to build the Aeronca Champ. So you'll see an Aeronca Champ that might have a year like 1996. That actually is an Aeronca Champ. However, the ones that we're talking about are mostly going to be those 1944 to 1951 Champs, since those were the ones that were your basic tube and fabric, no electrical system, hand start, Continental powered Champs. The basic layout of both airplanes is similar. Both tailwheel, high wing, struts, tandem seating front and back. Aeronca did make the Aeronca Chief, which was side-by-side seating. That's a different airplane. I'm not going to talk about that today. Great airplanes. I'm just not going to talk about that one today. One difference that I want to talk about is the landing gear. While the landing gear might look similar, there are significant differences between the landing gear. As you can see here, the Piper Cub landing gear has bungees. That's these things under these black boots in the center of the landing gear. The bungees are covering up basically a large bungee cord which is wrapped back and forth 3 or 4 times around 2 mounts. And as the landing gear takes weight, it stretches those bungees out. The Aeronca Champ, on the other hand, has oleo strut. The oleo strut absorbs the weight of the airplane as you land. The oleo strut on the Champ does not push energy back once it compresses. The bungees do. In other words, if you land a Cub with a little extra weight, downforce when you land, the bungees will stretch out and then they'll contract. That pulls the gear back together and will very likely pop you back up in the air again, allowing you to log 2 landings instead of 1. While you certainly can bounce a Champ, the Champ is a little more forgiving of extra downforce when you land. Here's a picture of the basic Piper Cub interior, and one of the main differences you notice immediately is that the pilot sits in the back. This gives you an interesting view, both as you can see here in taxi and in flying. As you taxi, you tend to stick your head out of the window to see what's in front of you. In the Champ, you sit in the front. Therefore, the pilot has a much better unobstructed view during taxi and all phases of flight. The passenger in the Champ obviously sits in the back, whereas in the Cub, the passenger sits in the front. The overall dimensions of the Champ cockpit tend to be a little bit bigger. It's a little bit longer, it's a little bit wider, has a little bit bigger baggage compartment. Here you can see a picture of the instrument panel of a Cub. The Cub instrument panel did change slightly from year to year, from 38 up to 47. The Champ panel also changed a little bit over the years. But you can tell by looking at these two comparisons that the Champ panel does seem a little bit wider, which it is. However, they both have the same basic instrumentation of a tack, an airspeed, a magnetic compass, an altimeter, and then an oil pressure and an oil temperature gauge. Both aircraft have a header tank right in front of the instrument panel between you and the engine, which uses a float type fuel gauge. How much wire is left above the cap tells you how much gas you have in there. Both of these aircraft also can be certified with an addition of a wing tank. One other slight thing I'll notice difference here is the location of the carburetor heat. In the Aeronca, as you can see here, the carb heat is on the left side of the cockpit under the fuel switch. In the Cub, the carb heat is next to the passenger's right leg, which can be a bit of a challenge if you're sitting in the back seat to reach up and pull the carb heat. A lot of Cub owners, like myself, have either attached a piece of metal or a piece of paracord onto the carb knob so that you can pull it from the back seat and open it. And then you use your right foot to push it closed. Another difference I'll mention is the trim system. The trim system in the Cub is a wheel located down here on the left side of the passenger compartment. It's pretty easy for both passengers to reach. What the wheel does is it moves the entire horizontal stabilator through this jack screw located behind here. Therefore, very slight trim adjustments are necessary to get a reaction from the airplane. The Aeronca has a more modern style trim system where the trim affects this small trailing edge on the back of the elevator, and it is operated by this wheel over the pilot's head. Pretty soon you learn which way left or right is up and down. It's not terribly difficult, but it is a slightly different system than the Cub. The Cub, to me, seems to be a little bit easier to trim up for smooth hands-off flight because of the larger tail surface being affected by the trim wheel, but that might just be a personal preference. Another difference I'll mention is in prop starting. Most of these airplanes were built initially without an electrical system, so you have to hand prop them. In the Cub, as you can see, and as you've seen in some of my videos, I'll stand here and I can move the prop, and I can also still reach the throttle and the mags and the fuel cutoff switch all at once. I'm also standing behind the propeller, so if I do something wrong and the airplane decides to go that way, I'm behind the prop. The way the door operates, and I'll put a picture of the door in right here, you can see the door is hinged more like a modern airplane. So you cannot stand behind the prop and reach into the cockpit. So most people will prop an Aeronca Champ from in front of the propeller. Not a big deal, seen it done all the time, but that is one small difference. I do prefer the Cub method of being able to stand behind the prop when you hand start it. And that brings me to probably the biggest difference in the feeling of flying the airplane is the Aeronca, the door is closed during flight, like most other airplanes, whereas in the Cub, it's very common to fly with the door open. This gives you a great view of the ground below, especially to the right. Next, I'll talk about weights. Weight's important in an airplane. Cubs almost universally are limited to a gross weight of 1,220 pounds. Most Aeroncas were certified slightly higher, anywhere from 13 to 1350 to then up to 1450. The 1450 is significant because that's above light sport allowances. So if you're flying one of these airplanes under the light sport rules of different medical and different licensing requirements, that type of Champ would not be allowed. You would need to be in one of these sub 1,350 pound Champs, which there's a lot of them around. However, all the Cubs are going to be 1,220 pounds. There is some Cubs that are slightly higher if you do a certain modification, but for a general rule, all Cubs are 1,220 pounds. The weights are significant on both of these airplanes because these airplanes have had a lot of modifications over the years. A lot of them have gained weight. Empty weights in Cubs start around 650 pounds. They start about 100 pounds heavier in an Aeronca, but the gross weight's a little bit higher. In any regards, whichever one of these airplanes you're looking at, pay a lot of attention to what the empty weight and what the gross is, because I've seen a lot of Champs out there that are in effect single-seat airplanes because they have an empty weight upwards of 900 pounds because of a bunch of additions to it. And then with a gross weight of 1,350, when you add fuel and one 220-pound passenger, you're left with a little over 100 pounds. So do keep an eye on the weight. If you start out with less weight with the Cub, you have a less gross weight, you can still get two people in full bags and full gas like you can in mine. Both Univair and WAG Aero have parts for all kinds of different versions of Champs and Cubs. If you had the data plate of a Cub, you could pretty much build a new Piper Cub out of a WAG Aero catalog. It probably cost you $100,000, but you could do it. So there's lots of parts around. Both of these airplanes can be put on skis and on floats and have numerous other modifications be done to them. So, in conclusion, I'm not going to say which one of these airplanes is better, because I don't think one of them is better than the other one. I think the Piper Cub flies a little better. I think it flies a little smoother. I think it has lighter controls. And I think there's a certain coolness factor to having the door open and the fact that you own a Piper Cub. The Champ has better visibility, is generally a little bigger and more comfortable inside, and they tend to be cheaper. Even though they made fewer Champs. They made about 8,000 Champs while they made almost 20,000 Piper Cubs. Still, the Piper Cub has a bit of an allure to it, which tends them to be a little more collectible, which makes them a little more expensive. Given comparable engine times and condition, a Champ will usually be a little bit cheaper than a Cub. However, as I've told my friends regarding a Piper Cub, about a year and a half ago, I was over at my other airport, which is a paved airport with lots of corporate hangars and Gulfstreams and Learjets and all kinds of business aviation in and out of there. And I was waiting to take off. And there were airplanes landing, and I had my head down messing with the radio while I was just parked off the side of the runway waiting to leave. And I was fiddling with the radio or something, but I wasn't really looking outside the airplane. And I heard the radio key up, and this voice said, "Hey, pretty Cub over there." I look up, and it's a co-pilot looking out the co-pilot window of about a $35 million Gulfstream, and he kind of waves at me as he taxis by. You probably get that in a Champ every now and then too. But if you have a Cub, you'll always be one of the coolest people at the gas pumps, no matter what else is on the airport. They're both great flying airplanes. Find the one that fits your mission better and keep flying. Thanks for watching. If you like the videos, hit subscribe. Thanks.